of, I don't know what to call this yet. I haven't come up with a name. I should probably do that. But hey, welcome to episode 2. I am going to continue kind of telling the background of my story, the trajectory of my relationship. And so today we're going to go over year 2 of being with my husband, soon to be ex-husband. And I kind of, so last episode I was starting to talk about, well, I talked about year 1 and some of the red flags that I started to see in year 1, because as I now know, after having been in therapy for 2.5 years at this point, almost 2.5 years, this is not, his behaviors did not just start out of the blue. I initially was kind of that mindset. I really thought that this was a person who had quickly gone downhill in his mental health, and that, all of this, started and blew up about 2 years ago. That's really, now I know that that isn't the case. And my therapist has kind of helped me to see that, has helped me to remember some of these incidents that occurred years ago that I had either forgotten about or I saw them differently at the time because I was in love and I was very much dedicated to this relationship, and he had love bombed me so hard at the start. I thought he was my soulmate, XYZ, all of these things. So again, like, now in hindsight, I see these red flags. All that being said, his behavior did certainly escalate throughout the past 2 years. I'm not trying to say that he was the devil from day one, because he wasn't. We had a lot of good times. We had a lot of good memories. But my purpose in doing this podcast, YouTube channel, whatever you want to call it, is to, again, I talked about this in episode 1. It's to help me process for sure. And to just reiterate to my very traumatized brain that this person started showing signs of mental illness from the get-go. This wasn't anything that I did to cause him to act this way. This was the result of trauma that he had experienced as a child, etc., etc. So it's that, and then it's also, and I spoke about this during episode 1, like, this is, I hope that whoever listens to this sees this as a safe space for them to be able to think about, like, if they're going through something if they're going through the same things that I went through or similar things. I hope that this just gives them some perspective. I hope that, it could be maybe somewhat educational. Obviously, I'm not a professional. This is only my experience. But again, my hope is that, I don't know, that it's helpful to someone, that they're able to relate, that maybe after talking or hearing from me, they're able to consider that there may be some red flags that they missed, XYZ. So anyway, that was a longer intro than I intended it to be. Let me go ahead and jump into year 2. So year 2 of my relationship, my ex and I move into another apartment together. So this is now our second apartment. And the apartment itself was a hot mess, let me tell you. It was downtown of the city that we were living in. And it was in this mansion that had been converted. The rooms in this mansion had been converted into individual apartments. Okay. So we move into this place, and the intention of us moving in there, the reason why we picked this particular building was because they allowed German Shepherds, and we wanted a German Shepherd. We were going to get a German Shepherd. So big breeds like that, ferocious breeds like that are often banned in certain buildings. And so that's why we picked this building. They allowed, quote unquote, aggressive breeds. So we move into this building. At first it seemed great. And then we shortly recognized that it was not great. And we had so many issues throughout the time we were there. We had a leak through the ceiling that ruined a bunch of clothes because it came through the closet. So it ruined some of the things that were on the shelf in the closet and then a bunch of my clothes, which was just lovely. Our refrigerator died like 3 or 4 times. Like they kept having to get us new fridges, but they were never new fridges. They were always, like older fridges that had just been repaired. And so then they would die again. We would lose all our groceries. Like it was a hot mess. And we were we were not well off at the time. We were pretty young. We were in our early 20s. So anyway, all that happens. Gosh, we had a mouse infestation. We had a fly infestation. We literally had to go and stay with my ex's mom for a few days because of the mice. It was disgusting. Anyway, none of this really has that much to do with the story, but it is like looking back, it's like, oh my God, how did we live through that? This place was just the absolute worst. So some of the things that started to occur or continued to occur, I guess I should say, in this apartment. So the first thing, and I should have probably brought this up last episode because this was also the case in the first apartment that we lived in. I was working as a server, not nearly as much as I probably should have been. When I was working, when we were in the first apartment, I was working more, but once we entered into the second apartment, I was actually back in school. So quick background about my schooling. I went to college right after high school. I spent a year at Providence College, dropped out after a year. I was struggling with my mental health. I wasn't quite sure what was going on. I mean, this was at this point, so many years ago, and mental health was so much more stigmatized than it is now. I did meet a school counselor when I was a freshman, because I had admitted to my trainer, because I was running track and cross country, I had admitted to my trainer that I was suicidal. And so she took me to see this school counselor who diagnosed me with bipolar within the first 10 minutes of meeting me, which was should have been a huge red flag. I didn't know anything other, but, so that happened. Anyway, it's just an example of the way I was struggling with my mental health. I stopped going to class. I stopped running. I was injured from running, all this stuff. So anyway, I come home back to where I was from. For about a year, I just lived in downtown with friends, and I took some classes at a local community college, and I worked. And then I did go back to school, and I was in school at SUNY Geneseo for 2.5 years, dropped out of there as well. Same issues with my mental health, major depressive disorder. At this point, I did know, once I came home, my mom had kind of said, hey, the stipulation of you coming home is you need to go see a therapist. And I was like, that's fine. So she took me to see a therapist. I saw this therapist, was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, et cetera, et cetera. So mental health was not great. So, needless to say, I did not finish my college career at this time. This was in my early 20s, early 20s, I was 20, 21. So then, I had moved back home with my mom. My mom at this point had left my father, so they were separated. My mom and I were living in an apartment together, which was honestly some of the happiest times of my life. It was so wonderful. Then about a year into that, she gets ill with brain cancer. So that she's sick for pretty much exactly a year, passes away. This is now the timeline of my ex and I started to date. So anyway, I knew that I wanted to go back to school, and I also knew that my mom really wanted that for me. So I started applying to colleges when my ex and I were in our first year of dating, when we were at the first apartment that we lived in, and I was accepted to SUNY Brockport. So anyway, second apartment, I get accepted to SUNY Brockport and I become a matriculated student. Okay. So I am now taking full-time classes. I was, taking however many credit hours is full-time. Maybe even an extra class beyond that, because I did really want to graduate. And so, I'm taking classes. So, because I was taking classes full-time and I was commuting to and from the campus, I was not working full-time. I was probably working 20 hours a week as a server. And in hindsight, my ex had a corporate job. He was a recruiter, worked at a local hospital, working 40 hours a week. And he always made me, from day one at the old apartment 2, he always made me pay half of everything. So we split everything 50-50 from day one. Rent, bills, everything. There were definitely times where he probably, he probably took more of the going out costs. If we went to dinner and stuff, I would say that he probably picked up more of the tab on that stuff. Definitely later on, he started to pick up more of the tab when he started to make more money. But even at this time, probably a little bit more. But I remember it, even that being close to 50-50. And now in hindsight, 10 years later, 9 years later, however long it's been, it does seem kind of strange that was the arrangement, with knowing now the fact that, I was in school, I was working far less than him as a server, so I wasn't making that much money. But the situation was, okay, so my mom passes away, and I received a trust from my mom that was able to be accessed when I turned 30. Okay. So at the time I'm 24, 25 maybe. And so, I have no access to the trust. That's fine. Well, there was a portion of money that moved outside of the trust. Okay. So when the estate was, the will was read and the estate was figured out, there was a portion of money, it wasn't very much, but there was a portion of money that moved outside of the trust that came to me immediately. So I didn't have to wait to utilize it until I was 30. So this money I was truly living off of this money for a couple of years, because again, I wasn't working very much and I was in school. So I utilized some of that money to go back to school, certainly. And I utilized it, when I couldn't make bills from just my income as a server, I would dip into these funds. Well, again, looking back, it's I think that my ex took advantage of the fact that I had received that money. And I think he took advantage of the fact that I felt a lot of guilt surrounding having received that money. And I know, and you might be thinking to yourself, well, how did he know that you had that guilt? Because I told him I did. And so I think because I felt guilty about having this money, I was, I think, extremely generous with it, or more generous than I should have been, maybe, because I felt the sense of guilt this was money because my mom died, I don't want to utilize this on me. I'll use it on other people. And so again, used this money for my living expenses, when in hindsight, it would have been nice if my partner had maybe taken a greater percentage of the living costs, in order to kind of just, like give me a little bit of a break and make it so that I didn't run through this money so quickly. But that was not the case. And at the time I didn't think there was very much wrong with it. I do remember at one point speaking with a very close friend of mine, and this was right before or either right after we ended up moving out to Denver, which is where I now live, was that I had said to her, I'm feeling a little weird. Like, I feel like my ex is taking advantage of the fact that I've received this money. But I also remember then very quickly trying to put that out of my mind and being like, no, he's not. Like, you're just being a little crazy. And like, I like gaslit myself about it. So anyway, so that was a red flag that I certainly missed. Like, I at the time didn't see anything wrong with the way we were living. And so like, I also want to take responsibility for that. I don't know if I may have certainly sat down with him and said at one point, hey, could we split things a little bit differently? I don't think I did. I don't remember doing that. But as I think I mentioned in the first episode, and maybe I didn't mention this, but when you are, when you're in a relationship that is unhealthy or abusive, or in a situation where you're in like fight or flight, it's very common to lose memories when you're dealing with like PTSD and stuff like that. So I do want to like have a disclaimer that basically says that everything that I'm saying on these episodes are to the best of my recollection, and like I'm doing the best I can. So there may be some things that I'm wrong about. There may be some things that I misremember, or things that I completely don't remember. But I'm doing my best to recall what I can recall. Okay, so that being said, let's move on. So one of the big red flags that happened this year that we were living together, that again, I saw it. I knew it was bad when it happened, but again, I clearly didn't do anything about it. And I also want to add that this person, my ex, this is when I noticed that he started to, like, again, looking back, like in hindsight, he started to gaslight me at this point and started to misrepresent what happened and try to get in my head regarding the truth of the way things happened. And I know that also plays a role in my memory. So again, I just want to kind of make a note of that I remember that this particular incident being that, like, the first time where I'm like, oh, he purposefully tried to change my recollection of what occurred. So, a little bit of background. We went to a concert this night, okay? And it was he and I and our best guy friend, the one that I spoke about in episode 1. And then a girlfriend of mine and her boyfriend. And so we go to this concert, which was a little ways away. And something happened at the concert with my girlfriend and her boyfriend at the time. It was rather intense, kind of traumatic. I'm not going to get into it because it's her privacy. But it made my ex and I kind of on edge. He was upset with me because he felt that I put myself into that, like I got more involved than he wanted me to get. And from my perspective, I was just trying to protect my friend, and I didn't feel like my friend was safe. And so because I felt that my friend wasn't safe, I was willing to put myself in a situation and in danger, I guess you would say, to make sure that she was okay and she was going to be okay. And he didn't like that. So we got home from the concert and he was already on edge and upset with me for that reason. And I think we were kind of upset with each other because I was upset with him for being upset with me because I was like, I'm just looking out for my friend. So anyway, we get back to our apartment, this crappy apartment, and we're with our guy friend. And there were so many issues with the heat and with the air conditioning in this apartment complex. And to be fair, I don't actually think there was any air conditioning. So just issues with the heat. This was the middle of the summer. This concert was in the middle of the summer. I remember walking into the apartment and the apartment was sweltering. And come to find out, the base heaters, because they were like baseboard heaters along the walls, were turned on. Now, I knew that I had not turned them on. And so I assumed, which was not correct of me, but I was like, who else would have turned them on? I assumed that my ex had turned them on. So we get in this argument about it. And I'm like, why did you turn on the baseboard heaters? It's 90 degrees outside. It's so sweltering hot in here. We're going to be paying extra for the electricity and the heat and bubble, et cetera, et cetera. He is swearing to the moon that he didn't touch them. And I'm not saying that he did. Like I said, there were issues with these baseboard heaters. They may have certainly turned on their own. They didn't work correctly. In hindsight, I don't think it was necessarily him that turned them on. I'm not going to sit here and say that he turned them on and then was manipulating and lying to me. I don't actually think that that was what was happening. So I think that they just turned on by themselves. But again, I assumed that he turned them on. And at this point, I was very stressed about money because, like I said, I was having to split bills and wasn't bringing in very much money and was living on this money from my mom. So I'm very stressed, and I definitely took it out on him. And so we get in this argument and it escalates and it escalates and it escalates. And all I remember happening is we were certainly yelling at each other. We were screaming at each other. And I go to lie down and go to bed. And I was probably still yelling at him. Like, I'm by no means at all saying that I didn't have anything to do with this fight. I absolutely did. I was engaging. I was probably part of the reason why it was escalating. Like, I wasn't being diplomatic about it whatsoever. That being said, I laid down on the bed and he flipped the mattress, like took the mattress and flipped it so that I fell onto the floor and the mattress flipped on top of me. I thought even at the time I knew that that was screwed up. And so that night, so I got up and I couldn't believe he had done that. And so I actually I drove to my aunt's house and I spent the night at my aunt's house because I was like, well, this kind of got physical. Like he didn't hit me by any means, but like, this is pretty, like, what? I can't believe he would do this, right? So I don't remember the next day. This is where I know that like that had such an effect on me, where I was so upset and so traumatized by that having happened by this person who I thought was protecting me and I thought was like a safe space, did that to me. Like, I don't remember anything that happened the next day. I have no idea how we made up. I don't know. I'm assuming we talked about it. I don't remember what happened. However, I remember having had conversations about it after the fact. So like months or years down the road, because I would bring it up very intermittently, but I would bring it up as kind of like a point to say, well, like, you did do this one time and that was super screwed up. And he started flaunting this narrative that I had punched him before he did this. And that's why he did it, because he was protecting himself or something. And I know that never happened. I mean, there have certainly been times where I've gotten extremely angry and I've you know, done things that I'm not proud of, but I've never I've never hit someone ever. So, yeah, so I know now, and this is what's so sad, is because he did start touting this narrative, and I was so unsure of myself, and he had such a spell over me at this time that I was like, oh, well, I don't remember this happening, but he says it's happened, so it must have happened. And yes, I know that my memory has been influenced by my relationship and by the things that happened in my relationship, but I know that I never touched him. But I gaslit myself for years thinking, well, I just don't remember it. No, I know I never touched him. And so for him to, again, in hindsight, to know that he just tried to escape any sort of responsibility for that having happened by saying, well, you did this first, it's so problematic. Yeah. So that's year 2. I'm trying to remember if there were any other red flags that really glaring to me during this time. I do remember the love bombing still continuing. So, that Christmas, he bought me so many things. I remember just being completely overwhelmed by the amount of money he spent on me. And I also spent a lot on him too, but I spent a lot on him because I knew that he was spending, I had kind of noticed that all these gifts and things under the tree or whatever. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I need to go balls to the wall for this person. And again, I'm not necessarily blaming that on him. That was my decision, certainly. But it is again, in hindsight, it just kind of sucks because I was this person with this, again, not taking in very much income, having to split everything 50-50. And I just felt so obligated to make these big grand gestures because he was doing that for me. And again, this was my decision. I'm not trying to skirt responsibility for that, but it just kind of makes me sad in hindsight that I felt the need to do that, even though I was in kind of a precarious position financially. So anyway, but I do remember the love bombing just being pretty intense. Oh, there was one fight. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I just remembered this. I don't even remember what it was about. Oh my gosh, but this is again just proof that my memory sucks about these traumatic things, and also that oh gosh. And also that again, this stuff had been going on for so long, was going on from day one, these horrific arguments. All I remember, and again, I can't even tell you the subject of the fight. Oh, I wish I could. But all I remember is being in the bathroom of this apartment with Spider-Man, our puppy. And at the time he was young, he was probably maybe 6 months old or something. And so, oh my gosh, but I remember vomiting the toilet, and Spider-Man came in and was whimpering and trying to comfort me. I felt because I was so distraught over something Travis had said. And again, I can't for the life of me remember what it was. And I shouldn't even say it was something over something he had said. I mean, it was, but it certainly could have been an argument that I instigated, he instigated, we both instigated. I'm not trying to put the onus on him for the instigation of the argument at all. But I just think it's very telling that whatever he said made me so upset that I went to the bathroom and vomited. And you guys will see that this is, I shouldn't say it's a theme. It only happened one other time, but there were times where he would say things that were so hurtful, and I loved him so much, and I truly believed he was my soulmate at the time, and we were meant to be together forever. And when he would say these things, they would hurt me so deep in my soul that they would cause me to become physically ill. And again, this is just another example of that. And so wow, that just came to me now. This is crazy. I mean, this is partially why I'm doing this. You guys might think I'm kind of re-traumatizing myself, which sometimes I wonder that same thing, if I'm re-traumatizing myself and whether this is actually a great idea. But it is almost helpful in a way, because, and I've noticed that every time, and I said this earlier, every time I speak about what's happened to me, whether it's with my therapist, whether it's with a friend, with a family member, or whether it's here on this, I start to trust myself more, and I start to believe what happened to me more, and I start to, again, recognize the warning signs and all of that. So it's helpful for me, and I hope this is helping you guys too. So yeah, that was year 2. We'll stop here for today, and we'll continue with episode 3 and year 3 shortly. All right, guys, I hope you have a fabulous rest of your day, rest of your week. Thanks for listening. Bye.